Hello, and welcome to what is AM Publishing in 2024 Part 1. If my voice is familiar to you, that may well be because you've encountered AM's incredible engagement team before. My name is Dot Kelly, and I'm an engagement manager at AM. I work with librarians, faculty, and students to integrate our collections into teaching and research. It's my absolute pleasure to be moderating today's webinar. If this is your first time attending our Publishing In webinar or your first time encountering AM, we create digital collections and technology platforms that enrich the study, research, and teaching of primary sources. As a company, we are incredibly proud to work with many of the world's leading libraries, archives, and research institutions, and they make their materials available online to the scholarly community through us. Now, these strong partnerships are really at the heart of our resources. We work with curators, archivists, conservators, licensing teams, and collection heads to understand the content and the nuance of every archive that we digitize. That includes building a bespoke editorial board of experts and scholars for each and every project so that we're working closely with both the primary sources and the people who preserve, catalogue, protect, and use them. But I'm saying we an awful lot here, and it's actually the panelists who'll be presenting to you today that put this into practice every single day. We've got 4 incredible collections to show you today. 3 of these are brand new resources that cover content that you will have not seen in any other AM collections. And then one of them is an incredible continuation of a very popular collaboration with the National Archives UK, adding even more exciting content. I'll save my introduction for each individual collection and editor, but suffice to say, we have some incredible content to highlight for you here today. We're going to be talking about Mexico in history, conflict in Indochina, the American Committee on Africa, and women's voices and life writing. Now, first up, we have Santino Prinzi. Santino is a development editor at AM, and he has been part of AM for over 5 years. In that time, he's helped develop a wide variety of our resources, including Mass Observation Project, Sex and Sexuality, Food and Drink in History, the Royal Shakespeare Company Archives, Medical Services and Warfare, Africa and the New Imperialism, and probably some of your other favourite resources too. Tino is going to be talking to you about the resource he's been developing, which is a collaboration with the Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley, Mexico in History. Tino.
Thank you, Dot, and hello, everyone. My name is Tino, and I'm a development editor at AM. I'm really happy to be here to tell you more about our forthcoming resource, Mexico in History, which will be publishing later this year. So as Dot mentioned, Mexico in History is a single archive resource of print and manuscript materials sourced from the Bancroft Library at the University of California, Berkeley. Students and researchers will be able to dive into Mexico's eventful past through the lens of these rich documents. The resource explores Mexico's history from the colonial period through the War of Independence, the national period, and Reforma up to the Mexican Revolution. Materials relating to the colonial period document the colonization of what we now call Mexico by Spain and the establishment of New Spain. Key collections offer coverage of the Mexican Inquisition, the Christianization of Mexico, and various governmental records relating to a variety of topics such as mining, land ownership, the Catholic Church, and religious missions. Also included are records relating to indigenous communities, though it is important to note that the dominant voice in these collections is of the colonizer. Material includes records of resistance, as well as linguistic guides, vocabularies, and translations of Christian doctrine into indigenous languages. The independence, national period, and reform period covers independence from Spain, international disputes such as the Pastry War with France and the Mexican-American War, and multiple sovereign and republic governments, including materials related to Emperor Maximilian I. Documents relating to the Mexican Revolution primarily consists of photographic collections, a rich collection of illustrated pamphlets and leaflets, and papers relating to Porfirio Diaz and Emiliano Zapata. As highlighted, we have a wide variety of material types in this resource. Included throughout the collections are colonial and governmental records, including land grants and official correspondence, circulars, laws, decrees, and proclamations. We are also including a large collection of religious sermons, as well as collections detailing various missionaries. Other document types include pamphlets, broadsides and leaflets, personal papers, diaries, photographs, maps, and many more. A resource of this scope naturally explores a wide variety of themes. As highlighted, the resource explores themes of national and international politics, including government administration, changing governments, and various conflicts, as well as the persecution of indigenous communities through colonization. A key overarching theme within the resource is religion, including the Catholic Church and missionaries and the Mexican Inquisition. Another key theme explored through some of the collections is everyday life, especially through those inquisitional trial records, personal papers, diaries, and pamphlets. Next slide, please. Moving on to collection highlights, I'll now talk a little bit more about this rich manuscript collection of Mexican inquisitional trial records. Dated from 1537 to 1831, these records primarily consist of detailed trial proceedings, including the gathering of evidence and testimonials by the inquisitors, records of the trial proceedings, as well as verdicts and outcomes. Many different accusations are investigated within the records, including charges for blasphemy, practicing Judaism, soothsaying, solicitation, bigamy, fraud, clairvoyance, practicing witchcraft, and for making a pact with the devil, among many others. The level of detail outlined in these documents allows students and researchers to have clear insights to the everyday lives of individuals living during this period. For example, records about those practicing Judaism include intricate details about their living arrangements, providing a picture of the Jewish Mexican home during the Inquisition. A couple of the documents also stretch towards the further reaches of the New Spain Empire, such as a record investigating the accusation of two indigenous sisters from the Philippines accused of being priestesses and brought over from the Philippines to Mexico City for their trial. Another key collection we are including is a large collection of sermons dated from the 1600s to 1800s. As you can see from these examples, many of the sermons include highly illustrative images, and these pictures range from crests and coats of arms to depictions of saints and religious stories. As you may expect, these sermons were used to spread Christian teaching. Some are adapted from dissertations priests wrote in their studies and comment on current affairs. Many contain a very pro-crown perspective, and topics include the stories of various saints, monastic and religious life, Spanish monarchy, the Immaculate Conception, epidemics, and the Inquisition. A favourite collection of mine is a collection of pamphlets and broadsides illustrated by Jose Guadalupe Posada. Posada was a Mexican printmaker famous for his politically satirical cartoons and sketches. He uses skulls, calaveras, and skeletons to make political and cultural critiques. The collection consists of Mexican chapbooks, broadsides, pamphlets, and other printed ephemera issued by Mexico City's leading penny press publisher. What I found so fascinating about these materials is the diversity of topics covered, which include written and visual insights to everyday life, politics, and culture in Mexico. Some of the topics include art and theatre, social customs, as well as songs, music, and theatre scripts. Another reason we are really excited about this resource is because Mexican history is AM's first resource consisting mostly of Spanish language primary source materials. With this in mind, we're including some additional support features to help both Spanish language and English language students and researchers get the most out of these primary sources. We will be translating English language metadata into Spanish and presenting this metadata together in order to provide this information in whichever language the student or researcher is most comfortable using, and to aid discovery pathways. Thinking about discovery pathways, we are also upgrading our HTR and OCR functionality to improve the accuracy of search results of Spanish language manuscript materials and to improve the accuracy of downloadable transcripts. Those using the resource will be able to search using English language key search terms and will also then receive relevant Spanish language results too, and vice versa. We are also creating a translated primary source set. This will include professional translations of especially selected primary source documents to create source sets that can be used by faculty in their teaching. The selected documents will be a representative spread of the different document types and major themes in the resource, allowing additional introductions to important topics in the resource. The translated primary source set will also include especially commissioned content to help students engage with non-English language primary sources, including issues and techniques around translation, and to encourage students to develop their own translation skills. I hope you have all enjoyed this whistle-stop tour of Mexican history, and please do get in touch if you have questions or would like to find out more.
Perfect. Thank you ever so much, Tino. Okay, I'm going to move on now and we're going to talk a little bit about conflict in Indochina. So I will introduce Danielle Kearney. Danielle is an assistant editor at AM who joined in April 2023. She helped on various projects so far, including 1980s Society and Culture, and is currently project lead on the Archives Direct collection, Conflict in Indochina, Escalation, Reunification and Withdrawal. That is the second part of this two-part collection, and it covers 1965 through to 1979 of the Foreign Office files for Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Danielle, perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about this module, Escalation, Reunification, and Withdrawal.
Thank you, Dot. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here discussing this Archives Direct collection, as Dot said, with files from the National Archives for Conflict in Indochina, Escalation, Reunification and Withdrawal, which is Module 2 of our very successful first module, Conflict in Indochina, Crisis and Upheaval, 1959 to 1964. Module 2 looks at 14 years of history across Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos from 1965 to 1979, and this collection will be publishing in May this year. So this second module includes both the files from the Foreign Commonwealth Southeast Asian Department and the general correspondence of the Foreign Office. And like Module 1, these files are split into sub-series for Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam. The second module covers a pivotal section of the timeline for the Vietnam War and covers key events such as the entry of the first US ground troops in Da Nang, South Vietnam, under Johnson's administration in 1965, the Tet Offensive in 1968, the death of Ho Chi Minh, and for the latter part of the timeline, the signing of the Paris Peace Accords with the withdrawal of the US troops in 1973, and in 1975, the fall of Saigon with the final reunification of Vietnam under communist rule. The files also look towards Laos and Cambodia's involvement, as well as material relating to the Cambodian Civil War and the uprising of the Khmer Rouge, their actions across Cambodia, and the international outlook and outcry of their dictatorship, included United Nations investigations and reports. Other document types in the resource comprise of official correspondence, photographs, maps, memorandums, first-hand accounts, and statements. And this second module will be publishing on our Cortex platform in May this year, which allows for greater accessibility for users, and our metadata allows documents to be more easily navigable than before. This collection hosts a myriad of themes and topics for researchers, of which I have highlighted here. So researchers can explore documents relating to Anglo-American relations and track how that develops across the timeline, communism, internal political conflict, foreign aid, trade, military and warfare, human rights, particularly in Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge, religion and culture, and the image in the top right there is a Buddhist demonstration in South Vietnam in 1967. Genocide and atrocities, protest and activism, especially of course in America and the UK against the Vietnam War, and also the international outlook of the internal political conflict and the Vietnam War as a whole. Next slide, please. So some highlights and area of interest. This collection is a very broad resource as highlighted by the themes and topics, and it will cater to multiple researcher disciplines. The chronology for this module will be extensive and will be building upon that of Module 1. As mentioned, the metadata available for researchers will be highly beneficial. We will have a map gallery continuing that on from Module 1. And we have commissioned some contextual features, including an essay by Kosal Path, a native Cambodian, on human rights in Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge dictatorship, which will be absolutely vital for researchers looking at this area of study. We also have documents demonstrating the changing British opinion of US involvement, and like Module 1, you're seeing firsthand the reactions of government officials with their notes on the official correspondence. And we also have a lot of material relating to international policy.
Okay, thank you very much, Danielle. We now have talking to us Rob Kinsey. Rob is a development editor at AM. He has been at AM for almost 6 years and has worked on a wide variety of projects, including the recently published resources Life at Sea and Africa and the New Imperialism. Rob is going to be talking about the records of the American Committee on Africa, which you may hear myself and my colleagues refer to as ACOA. Now, these records document its involvement in African liberation struggles during the 20th century, including a wealth of rare materials illuminating key figures in African independence movements. This is the first module in a 2-module collection.
Thank you, Dot. Hello, everyone. So today I will be talking about our forthcoming resource on the American Committee on Africa, the first module of which will be published in November. Founded in 1953, the American Committee on Africa, abbreviated to ACOA, was a non-governmental organisation dedicated to supporting anti-colonial struggles in Africa and informing the American public about African affairs. Based in New York, it coordinated numerous initiatives in solidarity with African liberation movements in the second half of the 20th century. It hosted African leaders to speak in the US, lobbied the United Nations and the US government, raised funds, provided educational and medical support, published magazines, newsletters and pamphlets to raise awareness, and helped to campaign against major US banks and corporations from doing business with colonial regimes. ACOA staff also travelled extensively throughout Africa, attending conferences and visiting newly independent countries. The ACOA resource, therefore, will be a key source for the study of Africa's liberation movements, international solidarity, and activism in the 20th century. Our resource will digitise the organisational records and collected papers of the ACOA, which are now held at the Armistead Research Centre in New Orleans. It will include materials from 3 main collections: the ACOA main collection, which are the records of the organisation up until the late 1970s, the ACOA addendum, which covers the early 1980s to the early 2000s, and thirdly, the George M. Hauser collection, which comprises of photographic slides and films made by George Hauser, ACOA's director from 1955 to 1981, during his many tours of Africa. Together, these collections will comprise the largest digital resource relating to the organisation. The resource will be divided into 2 modules. Module 1 will focus on the first half of ACOA's history up until 1981 and the retirement of George Hauser as Executive Director. Module 2 will then primarily cover the period from 1981 under its new director, Jennifer Davis, when ACOA's attention became ever more increasingly focused on supporting anti-apartheid struggles in South Africa. In this next slide, you can see the broad range of material types included in the resource. It includes all the executive board minutes of the committee and key outgoing and incoming correspondence, but it also includes periodicals, pamphlets, posters produced by ACOA and the many organisations it worked with. There are also photographs, films and audio recordings. In this next slide, you can see the key themes covered in the resource, including activism, US foreign policy, Cold War politics, human rights, lobbying, and race relations. The resource will also include academic essays that will explore some of these key themes in more depth. And finally, in this last slide, I just want to mention some of the highlights of the resource. ACOA worked with numerous African political leaders, including Tom Mboya, Julius Nyerere, Kwame Nkrumah, Eduardo Mondlane, and Oliver Tambo. And the collection includes correspondence to and from many of these key figures, as well as copies of their speeches and writings. In the course of its work, ACOA collected a large quantity of newspapers, magazines and pamphlets relating to Africa as part of its research library. These include publications produced by a number of African liberation movements and political parties, which are now rare or hard to find elsewhere. The resource also contains a wealth of material for the study of activism in the US. For instance, there is correspondence and collected materials relating to major US campaigns and boycotts to put pressure on US corporations and banks dealing with apartheid South Africa and colonial regimes in Angola and Mozambique. And lastly, the George M. Hauser collection contains over 1,600 slides and over 6 hours of film footage taken by Hauser during his trips to various African countries as part of his work for ACOA, which provides a unique capsule view of Africa during and following independence movements across the continent. Thank you for listening about this fascinating new resource.
And then last but by no means least, we have Rosie Threlfall. Rosie is a senior editor in the editorial production team. She's been working on women's voices and life writing since early 2023. And you will have seen Rosie's work in other projects that she's led for AM, such as medical services and warfare. Rosie.
Thank you, Dot. Hello, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here with you today to tell you more about women's voices and life writing, a multi-archive resource that will be available from February 2024. Women's Voices brings together collections from regional and national archives across England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales for the study of the lives and experiences of lesser-known women. Spanning a date range of 1600 to 1968, the resource offers many avenues through which to explore the differing conditions in which women have lived during the past 4 centuries, from experiences of witch trials, wartime and suffrage, to their everyday lives lived in and around these historic flashpoints. This is a sneak peek of our homepage, and here you can see examples of the type of material that are included in Women's Voices. Lots of beautiful handwritten diaries and photograph collections of very personal items. So the project is fortunate enough to have collaborated with a long list of archives who've contributed a wealth of fascinating material. You can see the full list on the screen here. The vast majority of the primary source material comes in the form of diaries, but there's also a range of other document types, most notably oral histories, of which we have over 140 hours of audio, as well as further transcript-only items. There's also a collection of printed memoirs from the British Library, a number of correspondence collections, as well as a smattering of ephemera. Every item has been tagged with a document type, so it's easy to filter the collection this way. The documents have also all been tagged with up to 3 themes. Here you can see the range of themes represented in the collection, from courtship and marriage to life in wartime and travel and tourism. Due to the very nature of these diaries and life writing in general, the way people choose to record their lives, there really is such a huge range thematically in women's voices. So because Women's Voices is such a broad and diverse collection, it's very hard to narrow down highlights. But since I only have 5 minutes to talk to you today, I've selected 3. The first is from the oral histories collections that we have in Women's Voices. These are really engaging content, and there's something so special about hearing someone's life story told in their own words. The one that I'm highlighting today is the Marston Vale Oral History Collection, which has been sourced from Bedfordshire Archives. The interviews discuss topics such as life experiences, childhood, family, wartime, immigration, religion, developments in agriculture, village life, and the brick-making industry. Most of the participants were associated with the London Brick Company, which at the time was the largest in the world. So the time that these contributors are reflecting on is the 1950s, 1960s. This collection is also complemented by an essay on how to use oral histories to research working class voices. Secondly, from the University of Birmingham collections, I've selected the letters of Marguerite Radcliffe Hall to her lover. Radcliffe Hall is a little bit of an anomaly in the collection. As I said, the collection is largely about a lesser known women, whereas Radcliffe Hall was well known as a prominent lesbian author and poet. These letters, which she signed from John, are incredibly vivid and personal. Different again are the diaries of Isabella Twisden, an example of the early material found in Women's Voices. Isabella lived in the early 1600s, and after her husband was arrested for a disagreement with Parliament, acted as head of the household. Her diaries include an eyewitness account of the execution of Charles I. So all the documents in Women's Voices have been indexed by our editorial team to build on and enhance existing archival metadata. The application of tags such as document type and theme to every document enhances browsing opportunities. Where available, we've supplemented this with additional tags such as collection, author name, occupation, and age. All documents have had HDR applied, so the manuscript material is full text searchable. The research tools for Women's Voices offer further browsing pathways. The guide to archival collections is useful for those who want to find out more about individual collections from each of the 13 archives and enter the material that way. Our timeline of author biographies arranges biographies from many of the women in the site in chronological order, so that women from across the different archival collections who were contemporaries can be viewed together. This is a great resource if you're interested in a certain era. We've also included a suite of academic contributions, including 6 essays and 3 video interviews on topics such as emotions, disability, employment, LGBT experiences, and archiving Black voices. Additionally, we have 5 exhibitions showcasing collection highlights, including one on the Welsh language material in the collection, for which we've included the exhibition text in both Welsh and English. Women's Voices and Life Writing is a rich and varied collection, allowing researchers to study women's life through their own words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Now, obviously, we are re-recording this session, and so we do not have any live questions from our audience. However, I do have a couple of things that I would love to draw you guys out on just a little bit more. So if I can, I'm going to start with Danielle. I know something that I am frequently asked by librarians that I work with when it comes to our collaborations with the National Archives. For conflict in Indochina, are the file classes being digitized in their entirety?
So we have digitized all bar 16 folders. These folders are classed as either missing or closed by the archive. Having a look at that material, however, it does not impact the plethora of material that we do have digitized. And as far as I can see, most of this material that is classed as missing is covered in other folders that we do have available. So For example, we have documents on the Paris peace talks and also public opinion, particularly American public opinion on the Vietnam War, and that does crop up in other folders across the resource. So whilst there are 16 not digitized, it is solidly covered in other folders.
Perfect. And then just a personal question for you as well. I was wondering what kind of material you have regarding the Khmer Rouge.
Yeah, we have an interesting array of material on this subject actually, and I think it's one of the real highlights of the collection. We have kind of a top level aspect. We've got correspondence on Anglo-Cambodian relations, international opinion and policy, policy towards Kampuchea, United Nations documentation and newspaper clippings, but then also we have refugee and victim statements. So we're really hearing kind of first-hand accounts of daily life of individuals living in Cambodia at this time. And we have reports on human rights and violations of human rights. There are also photographs included in the documents as well. And we have some first-hand reports on the Khmer Rouge victory in Cambodia, eyewitness accounts of that as well. So lots of material on that particular research area.
Great. Tino, I'll come to you now. So you mentioned a number of different ways in which HTR is going to be able to help us surface some of those underrepresented voices. I know that that is something that undergraduate students in particular are often very interested in. Could you perhaps talk a little bit more about some of the ways that you'll be supporting students to find underrepresented voices within the collections?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And there are a number of different ways that we're going to be looking to support students to find underrepresented voices within the collections. So some collections do already kind of indicate that there may be underrepresented voices present. So for example, there's another kind of collection highlight of mine is this diary called My Recollections of Maximilian. And this is a diary which was written around 1910, and it details the reign of Emperor Maximilian and Empress Carlotta in Mexico. And it's written around 43 years after the events were recollected, and it's written by a daughter of one of Carlotta's ladies in waiting. So this is like a really fascinating opportunity to be able to have insights to this part of history, but through that particular lens. Some of the topics that the kind of diary includes cover the period of preliminary negotiations and the election of Maximilian as emperor by the Council of Notables. And it also includes his arrival at Veracruz, talks about life at courts, as well as providing those everyday life insights to Mexico at that time. There are also some collections, such as the Inquisitional trial records that I previously spoke about, where we'll be looking for opportunities to signpost where there may potentially be underrepresented voices present in the material. So, for example, with those records, we have details of individuals' names and also the types of accusations that they have been accused of. And sometimes these accusations can indicate potential areas of persecution which may kind of align to underrepresented voices. So, for example, there is the persecution of women. There's a lot of kind of accusations of witchcraft or clairvoyance or soothsaying, which tends to be aligned to women in the collection. There are examples of indigenous communities in those records, as well as accusations of like practicing Judaism, or the accusation of being a priestess for implies non-Catholic religions, as well as some accusations of a sexual nature which do imply LGBT representation. We're also including guidance on how to search for different Indigenous communities in the searching guide. For example, we'll be encouraging people to think about how alternative spellings of search terms or antiquated spellings or variations of names for Indigenous communities may be a pathway into finding those individuals. And we'll also be looking to contextualize those underrepresented voices in our essay topics too.
Perfect. And speaking of essay topics, do you have any kind of contextual essays that AM is planning to commission at the moment?
Yeah, so many of the contextual essays will explore a variety of topics kind of related to the key themes I've highlighted. So there will be contextual essays that will kind of cover that kind of the timeline that we're covering within the resource, such as the colonial period, independence and the national period and the revolution. But in addition, we will be looking to explore the experiences of individuals within that history. For example, essays on and about Indigenous communities, about women in Mexico, as well as looking to commission an essay about enslaved and free Africans in Mexico. We'll also be commissioning essays around methodologies as well, such as looking at the inquisitional trial records to read against the grain, as well as how to use religious sermons as a source for historical research too.
Okay, so speaking about methodology, Rob, I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the audiovisual content that is going to be available in ACOA. I know that audiovisual content is something that really often appeals to undergraduate students in particular. Could you potentially tell us a few of those highlights?
So yes, the film footage and audio material primarily comes from the George M. Hauser collection. On his many trips to Africa, George Hauser took with him 3 key items, a notepad, a tape recorder, and a movie camera to record important events. Some of the key moments he recorded are independence celebrations in Zambia and Algeria, elections in Zimbabwe and Namibia, and particularly interesting is film footage of Hauser's 2 weeks in the Sahara Desert with the liberation group Polisario in 1979. There are also audio interviews with African leaders, including Tom Mboya, the Kenyan independence activist, Walter Sisulu, the South African anti-apartheid activist and member of the African National Congress, and Steve Biko, another major South African anti-apartheid activist.
And also, Rob, just thinking with subject librarians and area studies librarians in mind here, would you mind just telling us which African countries will feature within the resource as well?
So ACOA supported anti-colonial struggles throughout the continent. ACOA originally grew out of the ad hoc campaign group Americans for South African Resistance. And so South Africa was always a key focus for ACOA. But ACOA also supported liberation movements elsewhere, including Algeria, Angola, Ghana, Guinea-Bissau, Kenya, Mozambique, Namibia, Nigeria, Tanzania, Western Sahara, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And there are dedicated files in the resource which cover each of these key countries.
Fantastic. Okay, and then finally, a couple of questions just for Rosie about the Women's Voices project. So obviously, it seems like the Women's Voices project really focuses on diaries over other forms of life writing. Can I ask why that choice was made?
Thank you, Top. Yes, it's quite a simple answer, really. That choice was made in collaboration with our editorial board, and really the decision was taken to enable us to include diaries from as many different women as possible to increase the breadth of the collection, so that we're really covering lots of different types of lives and types of experiences by just focusing mostly on that one document type. Obviously, like I said, there's obviously a considerable number of oral histories, but in terms of the manuscript items, certainly the focus is on diaries.
And those oral histories obviously are fairly recent recordings, but the overall date range of the collection is 1600 to 1968. That's a very broad date range. Is that also to get a broad range of voices?
Absolutely, yes. So the oral histories were mostly recorded in the 2000s, but the contributors are reflecting back on kind of post-war Britain. And the reason that we expanded the date range up to 1960s is to include, like I said, a broader range of experiences. So those working class voices that come through in the oral histories that perhaps are more difficult to find in traditional manuscript archival material such as diaries and correspondence.
Definitely. I'm sure that also makes women's voices a perfect companion piece to anybody who has mass observation online.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm just going to very quickly show everybody our corporate site as well. So if you haven't found our website before, you can find it at www.amdigital.co.uk. If you are interested in hearing more about any of the collections that we've spoken about today, you can find those in the products section of our website, and popping across to new for 2024 will bring you to a place where you can find everything in our front list. There you will find information about all of the products that we've spoken about today, which are going to be publishing in 2024, and some of those that are going to be discussed next week as well. If you'd like to find out a little bit more information about any of these, then you can click into any of the products like so. You'll find not only information about the kind of key themes and topics that are covered by each of these collections, but also the material types that you would find in each of them and any of the key features that we are planning to add to these collections. Each of those product pages has a trial and a contact us button in it, but I would just draw your attention to the trials and pricing buttons up towards the top. Currently, these collections have not yet published, but if you request a trial with us now, we'll be able to set that up from the date of publication, and you can always request pricing. I do also want to mention that we do have a contact area of our site. So if you are wanting to send in questions for the panelists from today's session, then you could always send those in to our editorial or support teams, and I will answer those for you in next week's webinar. And speaking of next week's webinar, if you head to the insights section, you will find all of the webinars that we have coming up, as well as recordings of webinars that we have done previously. And if you're interested in signing up for part 2, you can find that in the insights webinar section. And in order to register for next week's webinar, you pop the register now button and fill in your details there. Thank you so much for attending today's session, and we look forward to seeing you next week as well.